Dr. Hahn, thank you very much for coming today. Let me give a very brief introduction of your background, if I could. Many people obviously probably already know your background, but Dr. Hahn is a graduate of Rice University and did his medical training at Temple University Medical School. And then he did his residency at the University of California at San Francisco. He is a specialist in radiation oncology and headed the radiation oncology department at the University of Pennsylvania's medical school, and later was recruited to head the radiation oncology department at MD Anderson Cancer Center, where he later rose up to become the chief medical executive of the Anderson Cancer Center. MD Anderson is the largest cancer center in the United States, and he is now the 24th commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, having taken that position in December of 2019, having been confirmed then. So Dr. Hahn, I know you're very busy. I thank you for coming. So let me ask you first, is running FDA harder than running the MD Anderson? And do you realize how much more complicated this is, or you think it's easier than running MD Anderson?
Well, David, first of all, my best to all of your members, and it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. That's a really interesting question. I can tell you that running FDA is a significantly greater challenge than my previous job at MD Anderson Cancer Center. There's a lot that's going on in Washington, D.C. I certainly didn't expect to show up as the 24th Commissioner of Food and Drugs in the middle of or the beginning of a pandemic. Certainly that has created great challenges for all of the country. But I couldn't be at a better place from my perspective. The 17,000 plus employees at FDA are just tremendous and have done remarkable work for the American people. So I'm really proud to be there and working hard alongside them.
So you have a different background, radiation oncology, than some people that have become the FDA commissioner. So how do you think you got on the radar screen of the White House? And when they called you and said, would you like to be the FDA commissioner, were you surprised?
Well, certainly surprised. I had had a fair amount of administrative experience running large, complex organizations and through multiple events over my career. So I think that's probably what caught people's radar. I got contacted from the administration and then began the process. And here I am, several months to a year later.
So you've been accused, or FDA's been accused, not you personally, but the FDA's been accused of speeding up the vaccine approvals to help with the election, and other people have accused you of, or the FDA, of slowing them down to affect the election. So are you speeding things up to affect the election, or are you slowing things down to affect the election? Which is it? You can't be doing both.
Right, David, exactly. And it's an interesting position for FDA to be in. Our career scientists and leaders and those who've been at FDA, I spoke to just a few former leaders just a little while ago. We find ourselves in the position that we're accused of either going too fast or too slow or doing too little or too much. And I suppose where we land up is if we're hearing criticism from both sides, we're probably in the right place, because at the end of the day for us, it's about the risk-benefit calculus, particularly during a pandemic like COVID-19. And we do need to call the balls and strikes on medical products, and we do need to use the available data. And sometimes, and particularly in a pandemic, those data sets aren't complete. Now, we're always willing to revise those decisions, but it does set up for the criticisms that you're describing. What I can tell you is that I am completely confident in the career scientists at FDA. They have made really good decisions based upon the data and science, and I support them 100% and have throughout this pandemic.
So can you explain for the average person what the approval process is? I assume you have to go through phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and then after phase 3, the data goes to the FDA. Is there a committee that decides this at the FDA? Do you personally decide it? Can you overrule the committee? Can you be overruled by the HHS secretary? How does it work?
Yeah, really, really important questions. So the authority to FDA, to me as commissioner, and then to the FDA as a whole, is delegated by statute, by law, from the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So the secretary delegates that to us. Within the agency, I can talk about that process, but just to be clear, we have not approved or authorized any vaccine. We have not approved although we have authorized, but we have not approved any therapy for COVID-19 at this point. So we've used what's called emergency use authorization. And the reason that's important is that's different from our standard approval process. The evidentiary standard, the evidence that we need for an emergency use authorization is that the risks outweigh the benefits. And of course, part of the risk is the urgency of the clinical situation, what the illness looks like, are people dying from it, and then what are the potential benefits from any medical product versus the risks of that medical product. So for emergency use authorization, not our typical approval process, but with that, those are the standards those are the standards that are out there. Now, with respect to vaccines, this is different than other medical products for COVID-19 in that a vaccine is going to go to people who are essentially healthy. They do not have COVID-19. So you can see that the risk benefit is different in those people than it would be in those who are sick in the hospital on a ventilator with COVID-19. So that's an important ground understanding that I think people need to have about where vaccines are. So, of course, we go through this process in the vaccine world of preclinical or animal testing, followed by phase 1, which is a safety assessment, followed by phase 2, which is an initial assessment of the efficacy. How well does it elicit an immune response? And then phase 3, where we assess both safety and efficacy in a large trial, comparing the vaccine to a placebo, an inactive vaccine. And that gives us the most robust data with respect to determining safety and efficacy. At the end of the day, the vaccine manufacturers are responsible for conducting all of those studies. We provide technical assistance to guide them. And you may know that in June, we actually issued a guidance saying, here are the data that FDA needs to see with respect to a vaccine regarding safety and efficacy in order for us to make our determination. And 2 important points on that. One is we insisted that there be great diversity in these trials so that our decision could represent all of America, so underrepresented minorities, those with comorbidities, and the elderly are just examples. And the other important point is that we set as a threshold for efficacy 50%. So what we wanted to see was a vaccine that was at least, now, of course, we all want to see a greater efficacy, but at least 50% effective in terms of preventing COVID-19 or mitigating the effects of the disease, essentially turning something like COVID-19 into a common cold. So those are the clinical endpoints we wanted to see. And we have been working with the manufacturers as they develop their clinical studies to actually get to those points. Now, each of these studies, when they get to phase 3, will have what's called a data safety monitoring board. And they're at specified points are allowed to see the data. When the data show a variety of different things, they can make a determination about whether to submit the information to us for an application. So for example, a data safety monitoring board might look at the trial data and say, we have safety concerns, the trial has to stop, it looks like we'll not go forward. They may say a futility analysis, which is where they say no matter how much more we do, this vaccine's not going to work. We have to stop the trial. They may say, we have reached a certain number of events, that is infections. It looks like the vaccine's effective. Let's submit the data to the FDA. And so all those possibilities could occur. That's on the sponsor. That's on the Data Safety Monitoring Board, which is independent. And only then do we receive the data for our application. And then our scientists look at it. They make a determination based upon that data. We provide that information to what's called a vaccine advisory committee, which is outside experts. They give us advice based upon the data that's provided and a recommendation to us. And that's a public event. Okay. Then the center ultimately, so in this case, the Center for Biological Evaluation Research led by Dr. Peter Marks, they make the determination. I will be briefed as the commissioner all along about this. I will have the opportunity to see the data. I can tell you throughout this pandemic, throughout my tenure as commissioner, I have not reversed a decision by the career scientists on medical products, and I have no intention of doing that now.
But you're legally, you or the secretary of HHS, could you overrule the committee, or but you wouldn't, you say, but is it legally possible?
There is that authority, but as I've said, there's no intent to do that whatsoever. Again, we don't want to prejudge this. We want to look at the data, and I have complete and absolute confidence in the scientists at FDA and the decision making that they have here.
Now, I understand there's a meeting on October the 22nd where a committee will come together and maybe look at some of the phase 3 data. Is that a relevant committee meeting for deciding whether you're going to go forward and prove somebody?
So that October 22nd meeting, we were required to put that in the Federal Register. What that meeting about is it's a general meeting about the process and procedures and the approach that we'll use to look at vaccine applications. Now, if we get a vaccine application outside of that time frame, we will arrange for additional vaccine advisory committee meetings to look at the specific data on that application. So we want to be flexible. We want to be responsive, but we will not cut corners. We will follow our rigorous procedures to assess safety and efficacy.
Based on your knowledge to date, what would you think is the likelihood that a vaccine will be available to the American people? Is it likely to be in October, November, December, January? What is your best guess today?
David, I don't have a guess. I don't have a crystal ball. I was a cancer doctor, as you said, before I came here. I told my patients all the time, I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't have a crystal ball here. It would be really inappropriate for me to speculate because, again, we haven't seen the clinical data. That's what's key here. And again, those clinical data are going to come from trials that an independent data safety monitoring board is going to advise a company about, and then we'll receive it. So there's no way that I could possibly know when that's going to come to us. I think everybody in America wants a vaccine as quickly as possible. We want a very effective vaccine, but we also want a vaccine that's safe. And so, again, we're going to call the balls and strikes on the data on safety and efficacy, and we're not going to cut corners on that.
Okay, so the vaccines that are under development now, they are all ones where you have an injection. Are they typically 2 injections you get? And how long would the vaccine last for? A year, 6 months, or it's unclear yet?
All of this is unclear. We're going to wait for the data to come in. A number of vaccine candidates are in clinical trials. Some are 2 vaccines. There's one that's 1 vaccine. And again, we really have to see the data. Cannot speculate on what the ultimate outcome is and the data would show. We really will, David, and this is a promise to the American people, we really will wait for those data. We will critically look at those data.
So you're the 24th FDA commissioner. It seems as if the other 23 are often on TV talking about what's going on. Is that a problem for having all these former FDA commissioners on TV talking about this, or not a problem?
Not a problem. So let me just be clear about this. This is an unprecedented situation with a pandemic that is, once in hopefully many, many, many years. I personally and the agency welcome input from folks outside of the agency, particularly those leaders who've had experience within the agency. One thing I've heard from them and that I can tell you I have relied upon is that the expertise of the scientists and the career folks at FDA, they're very, very high, that expertise, and relying upon them has been a staple of my tenure as FDA commissioner.
Now, Vladimir Putin said that he has a vaccine ready to go, a Sputnik vaccine or something. If I was offered a chance for that, would that be a good idea to take that vaccine?
Well, I'm not your doctor. What I can tell you is that what we heard in press reports, FDA will look at any data that come before us. What I pledge to you is the American people, when we say that a vaccine is safe and effective, they're putting our stamp of approval behind that. All other vaccines that don't have it, we can't put our stamp of approval behind it.
Okay, so there's been a lot of controversy over hydroxychloroquine. You probably have heard about that. So today, if somebody came to me and said, why don't you take some hydroxychloroquine to prevent getting this disease, what would you say that I should do? Should I take it or not?
I would say you should consult your physician, that this is a decision in the context of a physician-patient relationship. We do know that there are data out there, and we want physicians to understand those data. There are 5 randomized trials, several of them in the inpatient setting, one of them the recovery trial from the United Kingdom, which demonstrated that there was not a benefit to hydroxychloroquine to inpatients. And there was the suggestion that there might be increased side effects related to the heart. So we want doctors to know those data. We have a number of other trials that are ongoing, particularly early in the disease, and we are going to wait for those data to make our ultimate determination about hydroxychloroquine. But also to know there are other randomized trials that have been completed earlier in the disease that have also shown no benefit from hydroxychloroquine. So to me, this is a decision that's made between a doctor and a patient. Doctor needs to understand where all the data are and the concerns about the risks.
Okay, what about convalescent plasma? That is something you've approved. Can you comment on where we are on convalescent plasma now?
Yes. So we authorized convalescent plasma because the totality of evidence was in support of that authorization. Now, just like hydroxychloroquine, just like remdesivir, just like all of our other decisions, we are continuing to collect data, and we very much want data from randomized clinical trials to update. But here are the data we use to make that decision. And again, this was a decision made by our career scientists in the Center for Biological Evaluation and Research. I support their decision. I think they made a good decision. First of all, published literature showing that in COVID-19, there was a benefit in at least a dozen studies. Now, some studies didn't show a benefit, but there was preponderance of evidence in these published studies. Secondly, there's animal data which support its use, including historical data of using convalescent plasma to treat other infections. Third of all, we had a really good safety read that that convalescent plasma was safe in patients with COVID-19. And then finally, the analyses that we did and others have done of the data from the Mayo Clinic, this very large expanded access program, demonstrated a promising positive effect. Now, that could change with additional data, and we're constantly looking at new data, but that totality of evidence is what we use for this authorization. Bottom line, we have kept convalescent plasma around as a potential therapy for doctors to choose if they want to prescribe that. And we felt it was important, given the totality of evidence and the significance of the pandemic, to make that decision. But I want to reassure the American people, we will revisit that decision when we have the data that justify relooking at it.
Okay, so no regrets about that decision then?
None.
Okay, so let me ask you, what are the side effects likely to be? All of us have gotten polio vaccine injections, I suppose, of our generation, and there's no side effects that I think are really inappropriate, but there always are side effects from medicine. So are there any side effects that are potentially dangerous from any of the vaccines that are now being worked on?
So I can't comment about specific side effects and any information we have at the agency because it's confidential commercial information. What I can tell you is that we know that from vaccines and the vaccine approvals we've done that they are remarkably safe. We do know that some vaccines have some local side effects like inflammation, things like that, headache, et cetera. However, we don't have the data yet for the COVID-19 vaccines, and we're waiting to collect those data and look at those data. So more information to come.
Okay, so on testing, does the FDA approve the tests that are used for testing for COVID-19? Do you approve that, or is that CDC?
So we do have, we have authorized the tests for COVID-19. Our key here is that we want to look at the data to make sure that they're reliable and reproducible and accurate. And so we have done that throughout the pandemic, and we continue to do that. We have over 500 applications still pending in front of us for additional tests. This has been a great example of a public-private partnership, and we've had a great response to our information that we've given in terms of what we require to see for these tests.
And do you believe everybody should get a test, or only people that have symptoms should get a test? Because I think the CDC said if you're asymptomatic, don't get a test.
Yeah, I think that simplifies what the CDC said. Again, probably best to direct those questions to the CDC. But the purpose of the revisions to the guidance was really to have there be a public health or physician consequence. And so much that's in there is said, consult your physician about whether you should get a test.
Okay, let's suppose you approve somebody, or the FDA approves some vaccines, one or more, and let's suppose whatever the date is, let's say it's the end of the year, January, whenever it's approved. How long will it take before people can actually get them? Are there enough vaccines that are being manufactured now? So once you give the approval, within a month or 2 months or 3 months, everybody in the United States that wants them can get them?
Well, we've been working with manufacturers on the manufacturing process. As you probably know, many of them are manufacturing vaccines at risk. Even though they don't have authorization or approval from FDA, they've been starting that manufacturing process. So getting prepared for the event, the possibility that one will be either approved or authorized. FDA is not responsible for the allocation. That is really CDC with the Health and Human Services. that is putting out the plan of who would get it and when. We're working very closely, though, with manufacturers to make sure that the quality associated with this manufacturing is what it needs to be, because what we want to make sure that every lot of vaccine has the highest quality possible for the American people.
So I assume it would be embarrassing if you got COVID-19, though it's not something impossible. So what do you do to stay healthy yourself? You don't want to be the FDA commissioner and coming down with COVID-19. So you're wearing masks all the time? Are you staying away from people? How are you staying healthy?
So our path forward in America to stay open, to do the things that we want to do before we have a vaccine available is these common sense public health measures. And that's what I've been following. Wear a mask, socially distance, avoid crowded, particularly inside crowded places, but avoid crowds as much as possible. When you can't socially distance, wear a mask and protect the vulnerable among us. Following those common sense public health measures, there is evidence to suggest that that has helped a lot across this country. We strongly recommend that for the American people, and that's what I've done for myself personally and my family.
All right. So are you getting a flu shot? Do you think everybody should get a flu shot?
I will be getting a flu shot, and I think we absolutely should follow your doctors and CDC's recommendations for flu shot administration.
And do you see any evidence that the virus is receding, or is it still in a phase where it's going to be growing and we're going to deal with this for quite some time? In other words, do you see any evidence that social distancing and testing has reduced the number of incidences, or you think it's still a serious problem?
Well, this virus is with us, and it's a serious problem. There's no question about that in my mind. But I do think that we have data from the White House Coronavirus Task Force that shows that these common sense measures that I'm talking about have, in fact, mitigated some of these outbreaks. We need to stay diligent. We need to continue to push forward with these common sense measures.
And the task force is meeting regularly. You're on the White House Coronavirus Task Force. Does it still meet regularly and give press reports?
We are meeting regularly, and we are discussing a variety of topics, such as the guidances, such as testing, such as therapeutics. So we are meeting regularly.
Okay, and a couple other things other than this main subject. What is the FDA position on the medical efficacy of marijuana?
So the agency recognizes, and we recently put out some information this summer on this particular issue. The agency recognizes that medical marijuana and also other marijuana derivatives such as CBD, cannabinoids, could potentially have some therapeutic benefit. And so we have helped developers in the pathways. We think that the best pathway for therapeutic benefits is our drug pathway. And so trying to make it clear to folks what are the data we're going to need to see to actually look at the effectiveness and safety of these products for particular medical conditions. So we are certainly open to seeing this, but we also realize that some people are making claims about these products that can't be substantiated by the data. And that is not okay. And we continue to look for ways to enforce against claims that can't be substantiated.
Is there any evidence we're making progress against the opioid epidemic we have?
Well, you know, opioids continue to be a significant problem in the country. And we remain focused on that. This is one of the things that, despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we've stayed laser focused on. You probably know some of the things we've done, such as try to enable non-opioid pain medications development, really working hard with developers, for example, of over-the-counter naloxone, the reversal agent for narcotics, also working with other forms of naloxone to try to mitigate the effects of opioid overdose, and then medical-assisted therapy. So we're working on all cylinders. Our team is continues to lean in on this, and we will continue to do that work on the benefit of the American people in this really difficult epidemic.
So are you confident that the FDA commissioner has the independence that he or she should have under the law?
So what I can assure you and your viewers today, anybody who's listening to this, is that FDA and me as FDA commissioner, we will independently call the balls and strikes on medical products. And at the end of the day, the decisions we make, the decisions that the career scientists make, will be made based upon the science and the data. And that is an assurance that I can give you right here and now.
So whenever you retire from this position, and the FDA commissioner job's a tough one, people usually don't last 5 or 6 years at this job. It's a job that can burn you out. Whenever you do leave, what would be your advice to your successor about how to be a successful FDA commissioner?
Well, one most important one is trust the career scientist. Trust the incredible expertise of the career scientists. Listen to their counsel. They have a lot of experience. They've done this a long time. They use very rigorous methods and approaches to make decisions. Trust the career scientists and the career staff at FDA. They are just terrific, and they do unbelievably great work on behalf of the American people.
So I assume you don't go to cocktail parties and dinners a lot these days, but I do get advice from people coming in all the time, an email about solutions that are going to solve this problem. And how do you deal with all these over the transom pieces of advice you get from old friends and so forth?
So I'm always open personally to advice. I think keeping an open mind about that, not dismissing it, is really important because for the most part, people have really good intentions with giving advice. Now, you know, sitting in the chair as FDA commissioner, have a broader view of what's going on both internally and externally. So I have to factor that into any decision that I make. But I'm always willing to listen to that. Now, we're hearing every day from people who have potential solutions to COVID-19, different therapeutics, different tests, et cetera. And we have a mechanism, something called the Coronavirus Treatment Acceleration Program, where we prioritize those applications with the highest science, the best science, so that we can move forward with those as expeditiously as possible. So one thing I'm really proud of in the agency is that we have worked with incredible speed to look at these applications and try to get medical products onto the market as quickly as possible through our authorization process. And at the same time, we have met all of our other obligations. So you may or may not know this, David, but we are meeting with at the same historical pace we have over the last few years, all of our user fee deadlines for medical product approvals. And that's a remarkable situation given the fact that our workload has basically doubled over the last 9 to 10 months.
So final question, members of the Economic Club of Washington, when you do get a vaccine approved, can we get it first? Members of the Economic Club of Washington, can you do something that makes sure we get in line first, or who's going to get it first if it's not Economic Club of Washington members?
So as I mentioned before, the Centers for Disease Control and the National Academy of Medicine are working on a plan right now. They're working with Health and Human Services, and they'll be making the determination about who receives the vaccine and in what order. Again, we all feel the urgency of the situation. We all want a vaccine that's effective as possible, but we want a vaccine that's safe. And that's my promise as FDA commissioner, that we will call the balls and strikes with our high, rigorous standards on safety and efficacy.
Dr. Hahn, thank you very much for your time. I know your schedule is very tight. I appreciate your coming by, and good luck on all the things you're working on. Okay?
Thank you, David.
Appreciate it.